The rain had started early that morning, a gentle drizzle that quickly turned into steady sheets of cold water. Clara Benson pulled her thin coat tighter around her, feeling the worn fabric cut into her shoulders, as if it were mocking her for even daring to hope for warmth. She had woken before sunrise, as she always did, the hum of her old radiator barely enough to chase away the chill of her small apartment. The peeling paint on the walls seemed to mirror her own life, faded, tired, and neglected. She glanced at the small clock on her dresser, 7:15. Her train had left 10 minutes ago. She had a choice: run for the station in her soaked shoes or face the consequences at her minimum wage job. She opted for neither. Instead, she sank onto the edge of her bed, letting the damp morning air fill her lungs. Everything felt heavy today, heavier than yesterday, heavier than last week. Losing her job had been like being tossed into a pit she didn't even see coming. One moment, she was a diligent barista, the face everyone recognized behind the maple and cream cafe counter, smiling through early mornings and late nights. The next moment, she was told she was disposable, replaceable, an inconvenience to the balance sheet of a business that hadn't even bothered to notice her struggles. The words of her manager, Mr. Landon, echoed in her head. "It's not personal, Clara. It's business." How cruel that sounded when it came from lips that had smiled at her every day for the past 2 years. Business didn't care that her mother had been sick, that her rent was overdue, the shoes she walked miles in had holes that let the rain inside. Business didn't care that Clara had given more of herself than most people ever could. She had been nothing but devoted. And now, devotion meant nothing. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the old mug that still bore the faded logo of a cafe she no longer worked at. She stared at the coffee-stained cup, imagining the warmth it once held. Maybe it was only the liquid warmth she missed, or maybe it was the sense of purpose she had carried every morning when she tied on her apron and stepped behind the counter. That purpose had vanished, leaving a hollow pit where hope used to reside. As she pulled her knees to her chest, she heard a faint sound outside, something almost imperceptible against the steady drum of the rain. It was a small whimper, quickly muffled by the gusts of wind. Clara's eyes flicked toward the window. At first, she saw nothing. Then, a flash of gray, a soft movement barely noticeable. Curious despite herself, she pressed her forehead against the cool glass and saw a woman struggling in the downpour. The woman's wheelchair wheels were stuck in the muddy sidewalk, and pedestrians were walking past, umbrellas shielding them from the rain, but their eyes avoiding the woman entirely. Clara's heart tightened. She recognized that feeling, the invisible weight of being overlooked, of existing in a world that moved without noticing your struggles. It was all too familiar. She hesitated only for a second. Then, as if propelled by a force beyond reason, she grabbed her umbrella and coat and dashed outside. Rain plastered her hair to her forehead, soaked through her thin coat. She barely noticed. All that mattered was the small figure trapped by indifference and mud. "Mum," Clara called softly, pushing the wheelchair. The woman looked up, startled, her gray eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. "Please, let me help you." The woman's lips trembled, forming a faint, uncertain smile. You don't have to trouble yourself," she murmured, voice weak. "It's no trouble," Clara insisted, kneeling to steady the wheels. "Where are you trying to go?" Just to Bloom and Bright," the woman said, pointing ahead. "I wanted to buy some white lilies for my granddaughter. She loved lilies." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Clara felt the sting of sadness pierce her chest. Clara guided the wheelchair carefully, protecting the woman from puddles and mud. "You're safe now," she said softly. "We'll get there together." Every splash, every soaked step, reminded Clara of the days She had walked home after grueling shifts, wet hands aching, but always with a smile. Somehow today, that same resilience had found a new purpose. Across the street, hidden in the muted shadows of an expensive black SUV, a pair of dark eyes followed their progress with quiet intensity. The man inside was tall, his posture rigid, but his attention was entirely consumed by the small act of kindness unfolding before him. He didn't know yet that this brief encounter would alter the course of his life, or that the woman in the wheelchair was his mother, Eleanor Reed, a woman who hadn't smiled genuinely since the tragic loss of her daughter months ago. Clara and the woman reached the flower shop. The air was filled with the fragrance of fresh blooms, mingled with the lingering scent of rain on stone and earth. Clara held open the door, letting the woman glide inside. Sunlight, filtered through the shop's wide windows, caught the petals of white lilies, making them seem almost ethereal. The florist, a woman named Ruth, looked up with a kind smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed." "The usual white lilies." The woman nodded, trembling slightly. Clara knelt beside her, helping her adjust her shawl and settle into the warmth of the shop. "I remember," Clara said softly. "You loved lilies. They always reminded you of someone special." Mrs. Reed's eyes filled, and a faint smile began to form, fragile as the first sunlight after a storm. At that moment, the man in the SUV leaned forward, unable to look away. He had tried everything, gifts, visits, even therapists. But nothing had coaxed a genuine smile from his mother in months. Yet here was a stranger, soaked to the bone, moving with such gentle care and attention that Eleanor Reed's lips curved into an expression he hadn't seen in forever. His chest tightened as he realized the truth sometimes. The smallest gestures carried the heaviest power. Clara arranged the lilies with careful hands, trimming stems, aligning petals, tying the bouquets with neat ribbons. She worked as if guided by instinct, her movements precise yet tender. Every step, every small act, seemed to breathe life back into the grieving woman before her. Eleanor Reed's trembling hands reached out, brushing over the blooms, connecting with the touch of someone who cared more than circumstance demanded. "You work like someone who's been doing this for years," Ruth said, admiration in her voice. "Where did you learn?" Clara smiled faintly, her damp hair sticking to her cheeks. "I guess from life. From noticing what others don't." From the corner of the shop, the man in the SUV exhaled quietly, fighting to contain emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. His mother's smile was small, but real. And it was enough to make him understand that fortune, power, and luxury could never replace authenticity, kindness, and the unseen acts that heal human hearts. By the time the bouquets were ready, Eleanor Reed's expression had softened completely. She held them close, inhaling the delicate fragrance. Clara's own hands were damp from water and rain, but she barely noticed. The act of giving had eclipsed all personal discomfort, and in that moment, every struggle she had endured, the job loss, the debt, the exhaustion, felt like preparation for this single, transformative act. The man watched silently as Clara pushed the wheelchair toward the exit, guiding his mother with gentle words and steady hands. He wanted to reach out, to thank her, to offer anything, but he hesitated. There was something sacred about this moment, quiet dignity in observing the pure simplicity of kindness, untainted by reward or expectation. He knew then that her life, her story, had intersected with theirs for a reason he couldn't yet articulate. Clara's voice, soft but firm, encouraged Eleanor Reed as they moved through the city streets. "Just a little further. You're doing beautifully." The woman nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time in months she laughed, a soft, fragile sound, but undeniably real. The driver of the black SUV started the engine slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile moment. The city passed by in muted colors and blurred motion, But inside the small bubble of rain, flowers, and newfound smiles, time seemed suspended. Clara's life, so recently fractured, had found a spark of purpose again. Eleanor Reed's heart, weighed down by grief, had discovered a flicker of warmth. And the man, unseen but present, had witnessed a lesson more profound than any wealth or power could teach. That the truest impact comes not from what we have, but what we give. By the time they returned to Eleanor's estate, the clouds had begun to break, and sunlight spilled across the grounds. Clara helped her inside, arranging the lilies on a table near the window. The light caught the petals just so, highlighting the gentle curves, the soft whites, the faint green stems. It was a small miracle, ordinary in one sense, extraordinary in another. Eleanor Reed turned to Clara, her eyes wet but shining. You brought something back today, something I thought was gone forever." Clara shook her head, humility in every gesture. "I only did what anyone would have done." But the man who had observed every step knew better. He knew the courage it took to step out into the rain, to see someone else's pain, to offer help without thought of reward. He knew that this ordinary woman had performed an extraordinary act, that the ripple of her kindness would extend far beyond this moment, far beyond their understanding. Even as Clara prepared to leave, a sense of peace settled over her. The rain had ceased, replaced by soft sunlight that felt like a gentle affirmation. For the first time in what felt like forever, her chest was lighter, her steps steadier, her heart open to the possibilities that tomorrow might bring. Clara walked down the quiet street, her coat still damp, the hem sticking to her legs, as if trying to hold her back from the moment she had just experienced. Each step felt lighter than it had in days, even though her shoes were soaked, and the city around her seemed the same, and rushing. Yet something had shifted inside her, a small, stubborn glimmer that whispered she could still matter in a world that had made her feel invisible for far too long. As she approached her apartment, a familiar sound made her pause. It was the soft hum of a car engine, low and respectful. From the corner of her eye, she caught the sight of the black SUV parked discreetly at the edge of the sidewalk. The tinted windows made it impossible to see inside clearly, but instinctively, Clara knew the presence wasn't random. Hesitant yet curious, she slowed her pace, unsure if she should continue or retreat. Yet the pull of unanswered questions made her step closer. The door of the SUV opened, and a man stepped out, tall, impeccably dressed, yet moving with a quiet deliberateness that suggested he was accustomed to observing rather than commanding. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second, and in that instant, Clara felt a strange mixture of recognition and unease. There was something in those dark eyes, a depth of attention that made her chest tighten. "Miss Benson?" he asked softly, his voice steady but warm. Clara nodded, unsure how to respond. I want to thank you for what you did today," he continued, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "My mother hasn't smiled like that in months." Clara's cheeks flushed. She felt exposed, as though a window had opened directly into her intentions and her heart. I was just helping," she whispered, uncertain if words could convey the depth of her own confusion and relief. "No," he said firmly, taking a step closer. "You did more than help. You reminded her, and me, of what we've been missing." He paused, measuring the words carefully. "Sometimes it takes someone outside of our lives to make us remember how to feel alive again." The rain had stopped completely now, leaving a crisp clarity in the air. Clara felt herself drawn into the quiet gravity of the moment, the weight of her recent despair suddenly intersecting with something far beyond her control. I'm glad," she said finally, her voice small. "That's all I wanted." The man nodded, acknowledging her humility, yet his gaze lingered, assessing her in a way that suggested he saw more than her words conveyed. He turned toward the SUV briefly, as if ensuring something unseen was in place, and then looked back. "Would you consider coming to the house tomorrow to help again, if you're willing?" Clara blinked. The offer seemed surreal, almost too good to be true. The weight of her struggles pressed against the edges of this unexpected opportunity, reminding her that hope often arrived disguised as impossibility. I think I could," she said cautiously. He offered a small smile, respectful but relieved. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." Without another word, he returned to the vehicle, and Clara watched the SUV disappear down the street, leaving her with the lingering warmth of validation she hadn't felt in months. That night, Clara barely slept. Her mind raced with the events of the day: the rain, the struggle of the wheelchair-bound woman, the fleeting but profound smile of Eleanor Reed, and the intense, deliberate presence of her son. She replayed every detail, every sensation, every fragment of the encounter, as if by reviewing it over and over, she could understand why fate had chosen this precise alignment of events. Morning arrived with thin slats of sunlight cutting across her small apartment. Clara dressed carefully, selecting her simplest but cleanest clothes. She brushed her hair, tied it neatly, and applied a light touch of lip gloss, more out of habit than vanity. When she stepped outside, the city greeted her in a quiet, tentative rhythm. Children walked to school, shopkeepers raised their shutters, and the air smelled faintly of wet stone and new growth. Everything was ordinary, yet everything felt different, infused with the possibility of what might come next. At precisely 9 o'clock, Black's UV arrived again, parked with discreet efficiency. The driver, polite and precise, nodded toward Clara as she approached, and she stepped into the back seat. The leather interior smelled faintly of fresh air conditioning and faint perfume, a contrast to the rain-soaked streets outside. She cradled a small bouquet of lilies across her lap, each stem tied with careful precision. The ride was quiet but purposeful. Clara felt her thoughts drifting between curiosity and anxiety. Who was this man really? Why had he taken such an interest in her actions? And why did it matter so much to him that his mother smiled again? She tried not to let her mind wander into fantasies or assumptions, but even as she tried, her imagination sketched pictures of wealth, mystery, and the unknown. When they arrived at the estate, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The grounds were immense, lush, meticulously maintained. Tall oaks lined the drive, their leaves still dripping with residual rain. Flowers trimmed hedges, and carefully curated gardens stretched as far as her eyes could see. She felt simultaneously overwhelmed and humbled. She had never been inside a home like this, never imagined a life so far removed from the cramped apartments and modest cafes that had defined her existence. A housekeeper greeted her at the front door with a soft, knowing smile. "She's in the sunroom," she whispered. "Today is a good day." Clara followed, the weight of anticipation pressing lightly against her chest. When the sunroom came into view, she saw Eleanor Reed seated by the window, a pale shawl draped over her shoulders, a book resting on her lap. The sunlight spilled across the room, illuminating the soft lines of Eleanor's face and the delicate arrangement of flowers nearby. Clara knelt beside her, offering the lilies. "I brought these for you," she said softly. Eleanor's hands trembled as they accepted the bouquet, and she whispered, "You remembered." "Yes," Clara replied. "I remembered." The two shared a quiet, suspended moment, the kind that carries more weight than words ever could. Outside, the black SUV waited silently, the man who had orchestrated this encounter watching from a distance. As they arranged the lilies together, Clara spoke softly about loss, about hope, and about the simple power of remembering what matters most. Eleanor listened, tears glistening in her eyes, and for the first time in months, she laughed, a soft, fragile sound that carried the weight of grief and the relief of genuine joy. The man in the SUV, Ethan Reed, watched quietly, his chest tightening with emotion. He had wealth, influence, and power, but none of it had ever felt as potent as this small act of unassuming kindness. He realized then that Clara's presence was not incidental, that fate had aligned their lives for a reason he could not yet articulate. Clara's day unfolded with gentle purpose. She guided Eleanor through the flower shop, arranged blooms with meticulous care, and shared stories that seemed to bridge the gap between grief and renewal. Each task, each small gesture, reinforced the quiet strength that Clara had carried all along. A resilience forged in hardship, now finding a way to touch others in ways she had never imagined. By mid-afternoon, the rain had fully ceased, leaving a crisp clarity to the air. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the lilies and casting long, soft shadows across the polished floors. Clara and Eleanor paused for a moment, breathing in the fragrance, feeling the calm that only genuine connection can bring. From the shadows outside, Ethan observed every interaction, noting the subtle movements, the quiet patience, the tenderness with which Clara treated his mother. He knew that life had brought them together for a purpose far greater than coincidence, and he felt a surge of determination to honor that connection in whatever way he could. Clara, unaware of the silent witness, continued her work, arranging bouquets, helping Eleanor settle, and offering quiet encouragement. Experience was transforming her as much as it was Eleanor. She felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known in years, purpose renewed, and a fragile hope taking root where despair had grown thickest. Hours passed, and the sun lowered in the sky, painting everything with warm hues. Clara helped Eleanor back into her wheelchair, guiding her gently to the car waiting outside. The act was simple, mundane even, but within it lay the quiet triumph of human kindness, the invisible threads that tie lives together in ways unseen yet profoundly felt. As Clara stepped back, the man who had been watching approached, his presence deliberate but unthreatening. "Miss Benson," he said softly. She looked up, startled. "I'm Ethan Reed. My mother, she hasn't smiled like that in months. And you made it happen." As cheeks flushed. I was just helping," she stammered, humility woven through every word. "No," Ethan replied, his gaze steady. "You did more than help. You reminded her, and me, of something we had forgotten. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to change the course of someone else's life." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken understanding. Clara felt an unfamiliar yet comforting warmth, the recognition that even in her own despair, she had the power to bring hope to another. By the time she returned home, Clara's mind was buzzing with possibilities. The day had begun in despair and uncertainty, yet it was ending with connection, purpose, and the first flickers of joy she had allowed herself to feel in weeks. She lay awake that night, replaying every gesture, every smile, every unspoken word, knowing that life could change in the most unexpected ways, and often, in ways that revealed the extraordinary in the ordinary. The following morning, Clara awoke to sunlight streaming through her thin curtains, painting her modest room in soft stripes of gold. She moved slowly, her body still heavy from the emotional weight of yesterday, yet her heart felt lighter, carrying a subtle anticipation she hadn't experienced in months. The apartment smelled faintly of damp air and old wood. Even that seemed comforting now, familiar as an old friend who had seen her through countless struggles. She dressed carefully, choosing her cleanest blouse and a simple skirt, brushing her hair neatly behind her ears. A thin line of determination cut through her thoughts. Today she would return to bloom and bright, and this time she hoped her presence would mean something, not just for herself, but for the people whose lives intersected with hers. She felt a quiet sense of purpose, as if every hardship she had endured, the long shifts, the poverty, endless worry, had been leading her to this precise moment. The black SUV arrived promptly at 9, its engine a low hum against the waking city. Clara slid into the back seat, careful to keep the lilies across her lap undisturbed. She inhaled the faint scent of leather and subtle perfume, letting the warmth of the vehicle contrast with the lingering chill outside. The driver nodded respectfully, a silent acknowledgement of the unusual importance of today. Clara's mind drifted to the woman she had helped yesterday, Eleanor Reed, and the small, genuine smile that had lit up her face. That smile had been more powerful than any words of gratitude, more profound than any recognition she had ever received in her life. The ride to the estate was quiet, each street passing like a scene from a film she could scarcely believe she was part of. Clara's thoughts flitted between wonder and apprehension. Who exactly was Ethan Reed, the man who had observed her yesterday without revealing his presence? Why did it matter so much to him that his mother had smiled? Clara pushed the questions aside, focusing instead on the small miracles she had already witnessed. She had lost her job, felt broken. Yet here she was, stepping into a life she hadn't imagined, carrying with her a quiet power she had never known she possessed. Arriving at the estate, Clara's breath caught again. The garden seemed almost alive, the dewy petals of flowers shimmering in the morning light. The sun filtered through tall windows, casting dancing patterns on the polished walkways. She could hear the faint whisper of water from a fountain, hidden among the hedges, a gentle accompaniment to the songs of birds awakening. Clara felt a thrill of awe. This was a world so different from the cramped apartments and bustling cafes she had known. Yet she felt no intimidation, only a sense of belonging she could not explain. Inside, Eleanor Reed awaited her in the sunroom, her posture poised yet gentle, her eyes reflecting the fragile hope that Clara had sparked yesterday. The pale shawl draped over her shoulders added a softness to her silhouette, and the sunlight highlighted the faint lines etched into her face by grief and time. When Clara entered, Eleanor's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. "I'm glad you came," Eleanor said softly, her voice trembling but warm. "Yesterday, it was the first time I felt alive again in months." Clara knelt beside her, offering the lilies once more. "I'm happy I could help," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. She arranged the flowers carefully, adjusting each stem with delicate precision, remembering every detail from yesterday. The way Eleanor's hands had trembled, the soft, almost imperceptible smile that had formed. From the doorway, Ethan Reed watched silently. His presence was calm, but charged with unspoken emotion. He had seen the impact of Clara's kindness and understood, in a way few people ever could, that her actions were born from a heart resilient beyond measure. He had tried to orchestrate joy, to buy smiles, to force moments of happiness, yet none had succeeded until this ordinary woman had stepped into their lives. Clara spoke quietly to Eleanor, her words weaving a tapestry of empathy and understanding. "Sometimes life feels unfair," she said gently, "but it's the small things we do for others that can change everything, even when we feel powerless ourselves." Eleanor nodded, tears glistening, and for the first time in months, laughed, a soft, musical sound that filled the sunroom with warmth. Ethan exhaled slowly, the emotion pressing against his chest like a tangible weight. Wealth and privilege had always afforded him control over many things. Yet they had never been able to achieve what a single act of kindness had accomplished. Clara had restored not only a smile to his mother's face, but also a sense of peace to his own heart, reminding him that the truest measures of value were invisible to the eye. The morning passed in a gentle rhythm. Clara arranged more bouquets, helped Eleanor with small tasks, and shared quiet stories of her life, speaking of struggles, small victories, and lessons learned in hardship. Each interaction revealed another layer of resilience and tenderness, reinforcing the silent bond forming between them. Clara's humility, her quiet strength, and her unwavering attention to the needs of others resonated deeply, a stark contrast to the fleeting, performative gestures of generosity she had seen throughout her life. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed higher, spilling golden light across the estate's expansive grounds. Clara and Eleanor stepped outside into the garden, the fragrance of lilies mingling with the soft earthiness of soil and leaves. Birds fluttered across the fountains, their wings glinting in the sunlight. Clara guided Eleanor carefully along the paths, supporting her with steady hands, offering encouragement, and sharing gentle words. Each step was a quiet affirmation of the power of compassion, a lesson that neither wealth nor circumstance could replicate. Ethan watched from the shaded veranda, his presence barely noticeable yet profoundly felt. He had never encountered someone like Clara, someone whose life had been marked by struggle, yet whose actions radiated kindness and empathy. He realized that the impact of a single person's heart could extend farther than any fortune or influence, altering the lives of everyone they touched. As they paused by a small fountain, Clara turned to Eleanor and spoke softly. "Your granddaughter's love is still here," she said. "It stays with you, even when she's gone. And in your smile, in your laughter, it lives on." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of healing. The smallest act, the briefest moment of attention and care, breathed life back into her grief-stricken world. The day continued in this gentle cadence, a mixture of tasks, conversation, and quiet reflection. Clara arranged the flowers, ensured Eleanor's comfort, and offered a steady presence. Each small gesture reinforced a sense of hope and restored dignity to lives that had been overshadowed by loss and uncertainty. And through it all, Ethan observed, learning more about the extraordinary impact of ordinary kindness than he ever could have anticipated. By evening, the sun had dipped low, casting long, golden shadows across the gardens. Clara assisted Eleanor back into her wheelchair, guiding her with gentle care. The estate seemed to exhale in unison with them, the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of fountains creating a symphony of calm. The impact of the day was tangible, a quiet but undeniable transformation in both women's hearts. Ethan approached then, his steps measured yet deliberate. "Clara," he said softly, "I cannot express how grateful I am. You have brought something back into my mother's life that I have been unable to restore, despite everything." Clara shook her head, humility in every motion. I only did what anyone would have done," she murmured. "No," Ethan said firmly, his eyes meeting hers. "You did more than that. You reminded us that life's smallest acts can carry the greatest weight, that hope often comes in quiet forms, unseen but profoundly transformative." The evening air carried a sense of promise. Clara felt a quiet joy she had not known in years, a feeling that her life, fractured and uncertain as it had been, intersect with others in ways both meaningful and extraordinary. Experience had not only changed Eleanor's world, but had transformed Clara's own perspective, teaching her the profound value of empathy, courage, and unwavering attention to the needs of others. As she returned home that night, Clara reflected on the day's events. She had faced despair, witnessed suffering, and yet found herself at the center of a quiet miracle. The weight of her previous struggles seemed less oppressive now, softened by the realization that even small gestures could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that defy comprehension. Lying in bed, she replayed the scenes. The rain, the struggle, the tentative smiles, gentle words exchanged, and the presence of the man who had quietly observed. Every detail mattered. Every moment had contributed to the fragile but growing sense of purpose she carried. Clara drifted into a sleep filled with the quiet, hopeful possibility that life could surprise her again, that her heart, once heavy with despair, continue to guide others toward light and healing. Morning came with a delicate hush over the city, the streets glistening faintly from the night's residual rain. Clara awoke earlier than usual, her body still carrying the weight of yesterday's emotional intensity, yet her heart felt lighter, threaded with anticipation. She dressed carefully, choosing the simplest yet cleanest garments she owned, brushing her hair until it gleamed softly in the morning light. She paused at her small mirror, her reflection staring back with eyes that had known pain, but now harbored quiet hope. The black SUV arrived promptly, as always its engine a muted hum against the awakening city. Clara stepped inside, adjusting the lilies across her lap. She could feel the faint vibrations of the road beneath her feet, but her mind was already elsewhere, lost in thought and expectation. The driver, a silent figure of courtesy and precision, gave her a respectful nod. She returned it with a small, tentative smile, feeling a subtle surge of confidence she had not experienced in months. The ride to the estate was calm, almost meditative. Clara watched the streets slowly blur past, the ordinary cityscapes rendered extraordinary by the anticipation of what awaited her. She thought of Eleanor Reed, the fragile yet resilient woman whose smile she had coaxed back into the world. She thought of Ethan Reed, whose presence she had only sensed indirectly, but whose impact on the unfolding events was undeniable. And she thought of herself, of the long path from despair to purpose, and how strange yet wonderful it was to feel that her life, broken as it had been, intersect meaningfully with others. Arriving at the estate, Clara was struck anew by its sheer scale and beauty. Gardens stretched outward in meticulously arranged symmetry, and sunlight caught each blade of grass and petal, making the world shimmer with possibility. She followed the housekeeper through the grand doors, her own steps steady but reverent. Eleanor awaited her in the sunroom, the soft morning light illuminating the subtle lines of her face. Her eyes, still tinged with the lingering sadness of loss, brightened when they met Clara's. "You came," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying a warmth Clara had grown accustomed to. "I've been looking forward to this day." Clara smiled faintly, kneeling beside her. "I'm glad I could help," she whispered, adjusting the bouquet of lilies in Eleanor's hands. The flowers were perfect, each stem aligned, each petal turned gently toward the light. In the simple act of arranging them, Clara felt a profound connection, a sense that her presence mattered, that the hours she had spent struggling and enduring had prepared her for this moment. From the shadows outside, Ethan observed. He had remained discreet, understanding the sacredness of the unfolding interaction. His mother's smile, though small and tentative, was genuine. He felt a tightening in his chest, a mixture of relief, admiration, and a burgeoning respect for the woman who had stepped into their lives with such quiet strength. He knew, without question, that her impact would reverberate far beyond this single day. The morning progressed with gentle rhythms. Clara assisted Eleanor with arranging flowers, guiding her wheelchair along the garden paths, and offering comforting words. Every action was deliberate, each gesture imbued with a softness that contrasted with the harsh realities of Clara's own life. Yet, paradoxically, it was her resilience and past struggles that lent depth to her compassion. She had known pain, and therefore she knew the value of kindness. Eleanor spoke of her granddaughter, of memories and moments that had been lost to grief. Clara listened intently, her own heart opening with empathy, connecting not only with the woman before her, but with the broader tapestry of human experience. Loss, hope, resilience, and the quiet, often invisible threads that bind people together. Ethan, observing silently, began to understand the profound lesson before him. He had spent a lifetime in a world of wealth, influence, and opportunity, yet none of it had prepared him for the raw, transformative power of unassuming human kindness. Clara's actions, small in appearance but immense in impact, had restored more than a smile. They had restored a sense of life, of hope, and of possibility that money could never purchase. By midday, the sunlight had grown warmer, filtering through the tall windows and illuminating the estate in a golden glow. Clara arranged the lilies with care, trimming stems, adjusting angles, and placing them in vases with meticulous attention. Each bouquet seemed to hold a prayer, a quiet testament to the resilience of human spirit and the power of empathy. Eleanor's eyes glistened as she touched the flowers, a subtle warmth returning to her presence. Clara felt a quiet satisfaction in these moments, a sense that her struggles had not been in vain. Every hardship, every tear, every night spent wondering how she would survive had prepared her for this role. She realized that the smallest gestures often carried the greatest significance, that true influence was measured not in wealth or recognition, but in the quiet, transformative effects one life could have on another. Ethan's presence remained understated but profound. He watched Clara with a quiet intensity, noting the way her hands moved, the gentle care in her voice, and the strength she exhibited in even the simplest tasks. He felt a deep respect, an acknowledgement that her life, though seemingly ordinary, possessed extraordinary value. Clara had unknowingly demonstrated the most powerful lesson of all, that character and compassion could transcend circumstance, wealth, and societal expectation. As the afternoon waned, Clara guided Eleanor back into the house, ensuring her comfort and attending to small details with care. They paused by a window overlooking the garden, the lilies catching the fading light. Clara spoke softly about hope, about the enduring presence of love, and about the importance of remembering the simple joys even amid hardship. Eleanor listened, absorbing each word, her gaze softening, and her smile growing more confident. The sun lowered further, casting long, delicate shadows across the estate. Clara and Eleanor stepped outside briefly, moving along the pathways with a slow, deliberate grace. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, the water in the fountains shimmered, and the world felt balanced in a way it had not for months. Each small step, each gentle word, reinforced the growing sense of healing, the quiet, incremental restoration of hearts that had been broken by grief and loss. Ethan finally approached, his presence calm yet commanding respect. "Clara," he said softly, "I cannot fully express what you've done. You have restored something to my mother that I have been unable to achieve despite all my efforts." Clara shook her head, her voice steady but humble. "I only did what anyone would have done," she replied, her gaze steady and sincere. "No," Ethan said, his eyes locking with hers. "You did far more. You reminded us that human connection, empathy, and quiet acts of kindness hold power beyond comprehension. Sometimes, the smallest gestures shape the largest transformations." Clara felt a strange thrill of recognition, as if the weight of her previous hardships had finally yielded purpose. She realized that her life, once fractured and uncertain, had found direction through service, compassion, and genuine human connection. The realization filled her with a quiet joy, one that would guide her actions in the days to come. By evening, they gathered in the sunroom once more. Tea was served, the table arranged simply yet thoughtfully. Eleanor's presence radiated calm and warmth, her smile now more confident, her eyes reflecting gratitude and a sense of belonging. Clara spoke of her experiences, sharing stories of struggle, hope, and resilience. Each word carried weight, a subtle affirmation that pain could be transformed into purpose and despair into opportunity. Ethan observed quietly, noting the depth of character and empathy Clara exhibited. He realized that her influence extended far beyond the tangible acts of arranging flowers or guiding a wheelchair. It was her perspective, her understanding of suffering and perseverance, that left the most lasting impact. Clara had created a ripple of transformation, one that would resonate through their lives long after this day had ended. As night fell, Clara walked through the estate's gardens, her hands brushing against the petals of lilies and roses. She paused, inhaling the subtle fragrance, reflecting on the journey from despair to hope. She thought of the countless hours she had spent struggling, wondering if her life would ever change, and now, here she was, living proof that resilience and compassion could intersect to create profound meaning. The estate quieted under the soft glow of evening lights, the fountains murmuring gently, the flowers swaying in the breeze. Clara felt a profound sense of peace, understanding for the first time in months that her actions, small, deliberate, and compassionate, had reshaped not only Eleanor's life but her own. She realized that the smallest acts, performed with sincerity and love, could alter destinies in ways both unexpected and beautiful. The following morning, Clara woke with a sense of anticipation she had not felt in years. The light filtering through her thin curtains seemed almost magical, painting the small room in soft golden streaks. She moved with careful precision, dressing in her simplest, cleanest clothes, brushing her hair until it fell neatly behind her shoulders. Her reflection in the cracked mirror revealed eyes that had weathered storms yet held a quiet determination. Eyes that knew grief, but were beginning to understand hope. She descended the narrow staircase of her apartment building, careful not to slip on the worn wooden steps. The city outside was stirring, the usual chorus of distant car horns, early morning chatter, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze forming a gentle backdrop to her thoughts. Clara's hands clutched the small bouquet of lilies she had prepared for Eleanor Reed, each flower arranged with tender precision, a small act of devotion that had become her daily ritual. The black SUV arrived as scheduled, its engine a low, unobtrusive hum against the soft backdrop of city life. Clara stepped inside, placing the lilies across her lap, inhaling their delicate fragrance, and letting the calm of the vehicle wash over her. The driver, ever silent and precise, gave her a respectful nod, a small acknowledgement of the significance of the day. She returned it with a tentative smile, feeling a subtle thrill of purpose that contrasted sharply with the despair she had carried just weeks earlier. During the ride, Clara's thoughts drifted to yesterday's events. Eleanor's smile, the quiet moments of laughter, and the soft warmth of shared understanding all replayed in her mind like a delicate film. She thought of Ethan Reed, the man who had observed her kindness without revealing his presence, and who now seemed intertwined with the unfolding narrative of her life. There was a quiet, almost imperceptible gravity in his attention, a weight that implied destiny, purpose, and the promise of change. Arriving at the Reed estate, Clara was once again struck by its grandeur. The gardens stretched endlessly, meticulously curated, each flower, bush, and tree aligned as if by divine design. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the main house, casting long, gentle shadows across the polished stone walkways. Clara followed the housekeeper silently, her own steps measured and reverent, her heart swelling with a mix of awe, gratitude, and cautious hope. Eleanor awaited her in the sunroom, seated by the wide window, the morning light illuminating her face. The faint lines of grief were still visible, yet her expression radiated warmth, hope, and an openness that Clara had helped to cultivate. "You came," Eleanor whispered softly. "I've been looking forward to this." Clara knelt beside her, arranging the lilies with meticulous care. "I'm glad I could help," she said quietly, her voice steady but gentle. The flowers, pure and pristine, seemed to carry more than their natural fragrance. They carried a message of resilience, empathy, and the quiet beauty of human connection. From a shadowed corner of the veranda, Ethan Reed watched the scene unfold. He was silent but fully attentive, understanding that Clara's impact went beyond the tangible tasks of arranging flowers and guiding Eleanor's wheelchair. Her influence was profound, rooted in the quiet strength, patience, and empathy that had carried her through her own hardships. He felt a swelling respect and an unspoken connection forming, one that acknowledged the extraordinary depth of her character. As the morning progressed, Clara assisted Eleanor with delicate tasks, arranging flowers, adjusting vases, and guiding her wheelchair along the garden paths. Her movements were careful, deliberate, each action infused with kindness and precision. She spoke softly about hope, resilience, and the enduring presence of love, her words weaving a gentle tapestry that offered comfort, guidance, and emotional healing. Eleanor listened, absorbing every word, her eyes glistening with gratitude, and her fragile smile slowly solidifying into a quiet confidence. The afternoon brought with it a calm serenity. Sunlight streamed through the garden, highlighting the dewy petals of lilies and roses, reflecting in the rippling waters of fountains scattered throughout the estate. Clara moved gracefully through the space, arranging blooms, guiding Eleanor, and sharing quiet stories of her own experiences, stories of struggle, loss, and the small victories that had sustained her through the darkest moments. Ethan observed, captivated by Clara's presence. He understood that her acts of kindness, humility, and patience were not merely performative, but stemmed from a deep well of empathy, forged through personal hardship. He realized that her influence extended far beyond the immediate moment. She was creating ripples of transformation, subtly shaping the emotional landscape of those around her. By mid-afternoon, Clara guided Eleanor back to the sunroom, ensuring her comfort and safety. She adjusted cushions, arranged flowers, and offered quiet words of encouragement. The room, bathed in warm light, seemed almost to pulse with a gentle vitality, reflecting the emotional transformation that had occurred. Eleanor's smile was no longer tentative but genuine, a testament to the quiet power of human connection. Ethan finally approached, his presence understated yet commanding attention. "Clara," he said softly, "I cannot express enough how grateful I am. You have restored something in my mother that I have been unable to achieve despite all my resources." Clara shook her head, her voice steady. "I only did what anyone would have done," she murmured. "No," Ethan said, his eyes locking with hers, filled with sincerity and awe. "You did far more. You reminded us of the profound impact of compassion, empathy, genuine human connection. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight." Clara felt a subtle thrill of recognition and quiet triumph. She realized that her life, though previously marked by struggle, was now a source of meaningful influence. Every hardship, every tear, every moment of doubt had prepared her for this role, allowing her to touch lives in ways both profound and enduring. As evening approached, Clara walked through the garden, feeling the gentle brush of petals and leaves against her hands. She reflected on her journey, the despair, the unexpected encounters, and the small yet transformative moments that had reshaped her world. She understood that hope could manifest in the simplest gestures, that resilience could inspire change, and that human connection was a force more powerful than any wealth, position, or material possession. The estate was quiet under the soft glow of the evening lights, the fountains murmuring a gentle symphony of calm. Clara felt a sense of accomplishment and peace she had not known in years. She recognized the enduring value of her actions, the invisible ripples of impact, and the quiet beauty of lives intertwined through empathy and compassion. By nightfall, Clara had returned home, her body tired but her spirit renewed. She lay in bed, replaying every detail of the day, the smiles, the gentle words, the careful arrangement of flowers, and the subtle but undeniable presence of Ethan Reed observing from the shadows. Each moment was a reminder that her life, though once marked by loss and despair, was capable of profound meaning and transformative influence. As she drifted into sleep, Clara understood a fundamental truth, that even in the darkest hours, the smallest acts of kindness could illuminate lives, restore hope, and create connections that transcend circumstance. She felt the quiet assurance that her actions, guided by empathy and resilience, had reshaped not only the lives of Eleanor and Ethan Reed, but her own as well, opening a door to a future filled with possibility, connection, and purpose. The next morning, Clara awoke to a soft golden light filtering through her curtains, the room infused with a sense of quiet expectation. The air smelled faintly of rain, soaked pavement from the night before, mingling with the familiar scent of her small apartment. She moved deliberately, dressing in her cleanest and simplest attire, brushing her hair until it fell neatly down her back. Today was another chance, another opportunity to step into a role she had never anticipated but had embraced fully. One that bridged her own struggles with the lives of others in ways she could hardly comprehend. Her thoughts drifted to Eleanor Reed, and the smile that had blossomed yesterday, fragile but undeniable. Clara had witnessed something extraordinary, the power of genuine care to reach into a soul long burdened by grief and bring light where shadow had resided. That moment had been simple yet profound, and she carried it with her as a quiet talisman of hope, guiding her through each step of the day. The black SUV arrived at the designated hour, its quiet efficiency a comforting consistency in an otherwise unpredictable world. Clara slid into the back seat, the lilies resting gently across her lap, their fragrance a subtle reminder of yesterday's triumph. The driver, always precise and respectful, gave a brief nod, and she returned it with a small, hesitant smile. Her mind swirled with curiosity and anticipation, pondering the events that were to unfold and the unspoken expectations hovering in the air. The ride to the Reed estate was serene, the streets a blur of morning activity, the distant hum of traffic mingling with birdsong and the rustling of leaves. Clara's mind wandered, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The long hours, the low wages, the exhaustion, and the relentless pressure of supporting her sick mother. Each hardship had shaped her, had instilled in her a resilience and empathy that now radiated in every action she took. She understood, in a way few could, the value of noticing what others overlooked, of extending care without expectation of reward. Upon arrival at the estate, Clara was struck again by its vastness and meticulous beauty. The gardens stretched endlessly, each bloom, hedge, and tree perfectly aligned, the sunlight highlighting their delicate symmetry. She followed the housekeeper through the grand entrance with measured steps, her eyes absorbing every detail, every nuance of the world she had never known. The experience was humbling, yet it carried a profound sense of belonging, a realization that her presence mattered in a space that had once seemed inaccessible. Inside the sunroom, Eleanor awaited, seated comfortably with the morning light illuminating her gentle features. There was a quiet strength in her posture, an openness that Clara had helped nurture, and a serene dignity that spoke to the resilience beneath the surface of grief. "You've come," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying warmth and anticipation. "I've been looking forward to this day." Clara knelt beside her, adjusting the lilies with meticulous care. "I'm happy I could be here," she said quietly, her hands steady as she arranged each stem, turning petals toward the light, trimming the edges with precision. The act of arranging flowers was no longer mere work. It was a deliberate act of love, a tangible manifestation of empathy and connection. Each bouquet seemed to hold a quiet prayer, a message of resilience, hope, and shared humanity. From the veranda, Ethan Reed watched, his presence unobtrusive, but deeply attentive. He observed the way Clara's hands moved, the tenderness in her touch, the quiet concentration that radiated from her every motion. He understood, as few ever could, the magnitude of her influence, not in wealth or status, but in the emotional restoration she facilitated through subtle, deliberate acts of kindness. Each gesture had ripples far beyond the immediate moment, touching lives and hearts in ways that could not be measured by money, influence, or societal recognition. The morning passed in a rhythm of gentle tasks and quiet reflection. Clara guided Eleanor along the garden paths, spoke softly about the power of hope, resilience, and small, deliberate acts of care. Each word she spoke carried weight, each gesture reinforced a sense of worth and dignity, and each smile she encouraged was a small triumph over grief and despair. Eleanor responded, her own expressions softening, her laughter becoming more genuine, and her fragile hope solidifying into a quiet confidence. Ethan remained a silent witness, absorbing the profound impact of Clara's presence. He realized that her influence extended beyond the tangible, that her understanding of struggle, empathy, and resilience made her a transformative force. Clara had unknowingly demonstrated the most powerful lesson of all, that the smallest acts of compassion could reshape lives, restoring hope, connection, and joy in ways that wealth or power never could. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed higher, bathing the estate in golden light. Clara continued to arrange flowers, carefully adjusting stems, aligning petals, and tying bouquets with precision. The lilies, pure and pristine, seemed almost to glow with the energy of her intentions. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the blooms, her eyes reflecting gratitude, healing, and an emerging serenity. Clara felt a quiet pride, a deep sense of purpose she had not known in months. Her own life, fractured by loss and hardship, infused with meaning through her interactions with Eleanor and the silent observation of Ethan. She understood that the simple act of noticing another's pain and offering assistance could carry profound consequences, extending far beyond immediate perception, touching hearts in ways that defy explanation. The late afternoon unfolded with deliberate care. Clara guided Eleanor back into the sunroom, ensuring her comfort, adjusting cushions, and arranging flowers. The room, filled with sunlight and the delicate fragrance of lilies, seemed to resonate with the emotional transformation that had taken place. Eleanor's smile was now fully genuine, her eyes soft with appreciation, and her demeanor radiated a sense of peace and confidence that had been absent for months. Ethan approached then, his presence calm yet commanding attention. "Clara," he said softly, "I cannot express how deeply grateful I am. You have restored something in my mother that I have been unable to achieve despite every effort and every resource at my disposal." Clara shook her head, humility in every gesture. "I only did what anyone would have done," she murmured, her voice quiet but steady. "No," Ethan said, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity and awe. "You did far more. You reminded us that compassion, empathy, and genuine human connection have transformative power. Sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the greatest significance." Clara felt a subtle thrill, an acknowledgement of the importance of her actions and the impact of her presence. She understood, finally, that her life, so long marked by struggle, despair, and uncertainty, was capable of shaping the lives of others in ways profound and enduring. Every tear she had shed, every challenge she had endured, had prepared her for this opportunity to influence, heal, and inspire. As evening approached, Clara walked through the gardens, her hands brushing gently against the petals of lilies and roses. She reflected on her journey, the despair, the hardships, the unexpected intersections of her life with those of Eleanor and Ethan, and realized that hope and purpose could emerge even in the most unlikely of circumstances. Each act of kindness, each gesture of care, had become a thread weaving a tapestry of renewal, connection, and quiet triumph. The estate settled into evening, the lights casting soft glows across the gardens, fountains murmuring gently in the background. Clara felt a profound peace, recognizing that the impact of her presence extended far beyond the tangible acts she performed. She understood that human connection, empathy, and resilience could transform lives in ways unseen yet profoundly felt, and that her actions had set in motion a ripple of hope and healing that would continue to expand. By nightfall, Clara returned to her modest apartment, her body tired but her spirit invigorated. She lay in bed, reflecting on the day's events. The smiles, the laughter, the subtle gestures, and the quiet observation of Ethan Reed. Each memory reinforced the understanding that even small acts of kindness could illuminate lives, restore hope, and create meaningful connections that transcend circumstance. As sleep overtook her, Clara felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose and validation she had not known in months. She understood that her presence mattered, that her actions had meaning, and that her resilience and empathy had forged a path to transformation. Not only for Eleanor Reed and Ethan, but for herself as well. In the stillness of her room, she embraced the certainty that her life, once fragmented and uncertain, now held a capacity for profound influence and enduring connection. The next morning, Clara awoke with a calm certainty she had never known before. Sunlight spilled gently through her curtains, illuminating her modest room and highlighting the familiar worn furniture, the chipped dresser, the small chair in the corner, and the teacup she always reused. Everything felt ordinary, yet infused with possibility. She dressed carefully, choosing simple yet tidy clothes, and brushed her hair until it fell neatly behind her shoulders. Her reflection in the mirror showed a young woman transformed, not by wealth or fortune, but by purpose, kindness, and the quiet affirmation that she could change lives in meaningful ways. The black SUV arrived punctually, and the driver greeted her with his customary nod. Clara stepped in, carefully adjusting the lilies across her lap, their fragrance a gentle reminder of the power of yesterday's small gestures. The ride to the Reed estate was serene, the streets moving past like a river of possibility, each building, tree, and passerby a silent witness to the unfolding story of transformation, hope, and human connection. Upon arrival, Clara followed the housekeeper to the sunroom, her steps steady, her heart alight with anticipation. Eleanor Reed awaited her, seated comfortably, her face softened by a smile that was no longer tentative. The warmth radiating from her mother's presence greeted Clara like an embrace. "You're here," Eleanor said softly, "and I've been looking forward to this day. Thank you for coming again." Clara knelt beside her, adjusting the lilies she carried for Eleanor with meticulous care. "I'm happy to be here," she said quietly, her voice steady, her hands moving with precision and intention. The flowers, arranged with tenderness, seemed to carry their own message, a testament to resilience, empathy, and human connection. From the shadows of the veranda, Ethan Reed observed. His gaze, steady and thoughtful, absorbed the intricate beauty of Clara's actions. He understood that her influence extended beyond the tangible, beyond arranging flowers or guiding Eleanor's wheelchair. It was her heart, her humility, and her quiet strength that made her a force capable of altering lives profoundly and irreversibly. Each gesture, small yet deliberate, held a weight that no wealth, influence, or privilege could replicate. Throughout the morning, Clara guided Eleanor with gentle patience, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet reflection. Each step through the garden paths, each careful placement of flowers, each word of encouragement was an act of empathy and grace. Clara spoke softly about hope, resilience, and the enduring presence of love, her voice weaving a tapestry of healing that enveloped Eleanor completely. The woman's eyes glistened with gratitude. Her laughter became more genuine, and her fragile smile strengthened into a confident, radiant expression. Ethan remained a silent observer, taking in the depth of Clara's character, the impact of her actions, and the subtle yet transformative influence she wielded through kindness and presence. He realized, fully, that her acts were not performative but born of lived experience, of struggle and endurance, of a heart forged by adversity yet unbroken in its capacity to care. Clara's influence had created ripples that extended beyond the immediate moment, reshaping lives in ways he could barely articulate. By midday, the sun was high, illuminating the gardens and bathing the estate in a golden glow. Clara arranged lilies, roses, and other blooms with tender precision, each stem, each petal a silent affirmation of care and attention. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the bouquets, her eyes reflecting healing, gratitude, and emerging serenity. Clara's own heart swelled with a quiet pride, a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment that could not be measured by external standards, but only felt in the subtle, lasting effects of her presence. The afternoon unfolded with deliberate gentleness. Clara and Eleanor moved through the sunroom and garden, arranging flowers, sharing memories, and nurturing a bond that had grown in intensity and depth with each passing day. Each smile, soft word, each gesture reinforced the fragile but undeniable transformation that had begun the moment Clara had stepped out into the rain to help a stranger. Approached at last, stepping lightly but purposefully. "Clara," he said softly, his voice carrying a sincerity that resonated deeply, "I cannot express how grateful I am. You have restored something in my mother's life that I thought was lost forever. And in doing so, you have changed my own life as well." Clara shook her head, her voice steady but humble. "I only did what anyone could have done," she replied, her hands adjusting the lilies with gentle care. "No," Ethan said firmly, his eyes locking with hers. "You did far more. You reminded us that true influence is measured not in wealth, power, or privilege, but in empathy, compassion, and the capacity to connect with another human being in ways that matter. Sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the heaviest weight." Clara felt a profound understanding settle within her. She realized that her life, marked by struggle and endurance, had equipped her to create impact where it was most needed. Every hardship she had endured, every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty, had prepared her for this role, allowing her to touch hearts and restore hope in ways that no monetary reward could ever achieve. By evening, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the gardens and bathing the estate in warm, golden light. Clara guided Eleanor back to the sunroom, ensuring her comfort and arranging the flowers with deliberate care. The room was filled with sunlight, the fragrance of lilies, and the quiet hum of life restored. Eleanor's smile had grown more confident, her eyes now radiant with gratitude and the emerging serenity of a soul beginning to heal. Ethan approached again, his presence gentle yet commanding. "Clara," he said softly, "I cannot overstate the depth of my gratitude. You have brought my mother back to life in ways I could never have imagined. Your presence, your empathy, and your quiet strength have created a ripple of transformation that will continue long after today." Clara smiled faintly, her heart warmed by the acknowledgement yet humbled by the responsibility it implied. "I am glad I could help," she murmured, adjusting the lilies. The simple act, the quiet attention, the deliberate care. These were the tools with which she shaped not only the present moment, but the future lives of those around her. As night approached, Clara walked through the gardens, her hands brushing against the petals of flowers, inhaling their subtle fragrance. Estate seemed to exhale along with her, the fountains murmuring gently, the leaves swaying in the evening breeze. Clara understood that hope, purpose, and resilience could emerge even from the darkest moments, and that her small gestures of care could create ripples far beyond her immediate awareness. She paused at the edge of the main fountain, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From despair to transformation, from invisibility to influence, from loss to purpose. Each challenge she had faced had prepared her for the extraordinary acts she now performed daily, acts that restored dignity, hope, and joy to lives that had been weighed down by grief and adversity. Eleanor joined her, seated gracefully in her wheelchair, her face radiant with the serenity that had returned to her life. "Clara," she whispered, "you've given me more than words can express. You've restored my joy, my laughter, and a sense of life I thought was gone forever." Clara reached out, placing a gentle hand over Eleanor's. "Your joy was always there," she said softly. "I just helped you see it again." The simplicity of her words carried immense weight, a reminder that sometimes most profound acts of transformation are quiet, deliberate, and unassuming. Ethan stepped closer, his presence calm yet deeply engaged. "Clara," he said softly, "I have watched the change you have brought, not just to my mother, but to everyone who encounters you. Your empathy, your care, and your quiet strength have created a ripple of transformation that cannot be measured. Its effects are profound and lasting." Clara felt the full magnitude of the moment. She understood that her life, once defined by struggle and hardship, now held the capacity to influence, heal, and restore. The small gestures she had performed, the arranging of flowers, the guiding of Eleanor, the quiet words of encouragement, were manifestations of a deeper truth, that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in empathy, and the courage to act with kindness when it matters most. The evening continued in quiet reflection and shared laughter. Clara, Eleanor, and Ethan spent hours together in the sunroom and garden, arranging flowers, sharing stories, and nurturing the bonds that had grown between them. Each interaction reinforced the lessons Clara had learned through hardship, that empathy is a force more transformative than any material possession, and that the smallest gestures, performed with sincerity, can shape the course of lives in ways both subtle and profound. By the time night settled over the estate, Clara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The gardens, now bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, reflected the serenity she carried within her. The fountains murmured gently, the flowers swayed in the breeze, and the world seemed aligned with the quiet order of purpose and meaning. She understood, fully, that her actions had created a legacy not defined by wealth, recognition, or fame, but by the lives touched, the hope restored, and the joy rekindled in hearts that had known despair. Months passed, each day carrying new opportunities to nurture, guide, and connect. Clara continued her work at Bloom and Bright, each bouquet, each arrangement, each act of care infused with the same quiet determination that had defined her from the start. Eleanor's health and spirit improved steadily, her laughter now a frequent melody in the sunroom and gardens. Ethan remained close, observing with admiration, quietly ensuring that Clara's efforts were supported and respected, and allowing the natural bonds between them to deepen without interference or imposition. Then came a bright spring morning, with the sun spilling warmth across the estate gardens. Clara stood beside Eleanor, holding a freshly arranged bouquet of lilies. When Ethan approached, his demeanor earnest and full of anticipation, he knelt before her under the arch of blooming flowers, his hands gently holding hers. "Clara," he said softly, "you have changed our lives in ways I cannot fully express. Will you be my wife?" Tears filled Clara's eyes, her heart racing with a mixture of disbelief, joy, and profound gratitude. She looked at Eleanor, whose eyes glistened with tears of happiness, and then back at Ethan. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "1,000 times yes." Ethan lifted her gently, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. The sunlight caught the petals of the lilies, making them shimmer like gold, and the estate seemed to exhale in unison with their union. Love, hope, and purpose had converged in a moment of quiet transcendence, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could reshape lives and create extraordinary futures. Months later, Clara sat on the same park bench where she had once wept in the rain, Eleanor beside her, holding her hand. Children played in the distance, laughter floating through the air. The world felt infinitely kinder, more patient, and infinitely more meaningful. Clara reflected on her journey, the despair, the kindness extended to a stranger, the unexpected intersections with lives she could never have imagined, and understood fully that one act of selfless care could indeed change not just one life, but an entire world. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by laughter, lilies, and sunlight, Clara finally understood the profound truth she had lived that to give, even when broken oneself, is to heal not only others but oneself, and to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary.